This is Your Bird Story, a broadcast of bird stories told by everyday people about their interactions and relationships with wild birds in cities. This season is funded by the Voice for Nature Foundation. I'm your host, Georgia Silvera Seamans. Welcome, everyone. I am here today talking with Tammah Watts, and I'm going to ask her to make her introductions.
Thank you for having me, Georgia. As you said, I'm Tammah. I wear all kinds of hats, as we all do. Birder, bird lady, which is different. That means like I wear something birdie every day. Notice birds in all shapes and forms. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a psychotherapist, a mindful outdoor guide certified through Kripalu, a naturalist, and
an author.
I forgot. Oh yeah, that. Okay, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, an author of the book "Keep Looking Up: Your Guide to the Powerful Healing of Birdwatching" with Hay House.
A public speaker.
That's true too. I do share about the different loves and connections with birds and birding. Yes. And a mother, wife, sister, friend, grandmother. Can't forget that. That's really important. Mimi.
There's so many parts to one's identity, right? It's not just one thing or a few things. I mean, that's quite a list you've shared with us. And I'm sure there are other pieces of yourself that haven't made the list. So it's great to have you here. How did you get the title of the Bird Lady?
It's self-appointed. It's a whole thing that I really haven't really gone into depth about, other than it represents for me, Bird Lady is really leaning in and embracing the love and passion for birds in all the ways that you can do that feels right for me and others, to show up and really claim it and proclaim it in terms of space, in the outdoors, from inside, spiritually, metaphysically, in the human-made form, as well as in the natural ways that birds show up. So that means then a bird lady also, she takes up space. So she might wear colors and sparkle and just let it be known that, let's celebrate birds in these different ways. So she's daring, she speaks up and says truths.
Why is it important to take up space? You've mentioned that a few times.
Because I think, and this shows up, like we're talking in the realm of birds and nature and access to nature and just some of the ancestral and historical dynamics that have occurred. This is part of it. I think it's a way of reminding me, it's like embracing the right to be how I want to be, and to really do it with intention and with joy. That's another thing. Like, and I know we use joy a lot when we talk about things, but I really mean that in this exemplified, really elaborate happiness and joy of getting to be in the ways that I want to be. So sometimes I might be outside in pajamas. Other times I might, hopefully they have a bird on the pajamas, not always, because they're kind of expensive. But anyway, how we want to show up. And that's not always the case. Folks are usually very self-aware, very self-conscious and inhibited, either because of external forces as well as can be our own self-imposed limitations and barriers about who we want to be, how we want to be. And that's, I think, what it is. It's like the bird lady transcends all of that. And I believe like the birds allow that avenue to be able to do that. That's what she means to me. The more I talk with you about it, yeah, that's really what it exemplifies.
What was the spark for this bird lady? When did you start developing her? How long has it taken? Have you always had the bird lady? Well, like, was the bird lady a seed and suddenly the conditions are right and she sprouted?
No, she hasn't always been around. So her official name, because she is an alter ego of mine. So there is a part of the bird lady that's an alter ego that I started really seeing her and creating her in a way that I can tap into her in times of need and also in times of, like we said, in celebration. So her official name is I Am Not a Bird Lady.
Hmm.
And it's in capital letters, except for the word not, which is lowercase. So it's really to be a play on words, to have some fun with that. And that's part of it, because when you think about historically what a bird lady is, usually what conjures up is this hunched over witch-like persona in Central Park or some park, feeding pigeons with a grocery cart on wheel, the little cart on wheels that they're pulling along that has everything but groceries in it. It's probably got her belongings, so it suggests she's probably homeless. She spends hours and hours with disheveled shoes sitting in the park, feeding the birds that are all around her, on her. That's the image usually you think of as Bird Lady. And that's what really sparked me to then say, no, I'm going to lean into what Bird Lady looks like this and like that, and looks like a lot of us in a lot of different ways. And we get to celebrate birds in fullness instead of having to feel inhibited. Because a lot of times I feel like birders of all walks of life and in certain spaces, and especially Black and African American people of color, don't get to do that. So it's layered. It's a bit layered, but that's really what it is. It's like, I'm going to claim this and really like live it up and live it out.
Yeah, that exuberance is really necessary because, right, historically, space has been limited, taken away. We've been told, well, you're too much, so you need to be smaller, less visible, plainer, etc. I am happy that the bird lady exists now, and I look forward to seeing your and her evolution.
Thank you.
So, for folks who might not be familiar with the writing part of your identity, you've written this book and you talk about a yellow bird that sort of brought you into this world. Could you talk more about that yellow bird, that experience of being pulled into the world of birding?
Yes. And I love how you are asking me the question about the yellow bird, because now over some time I've had the ability now to connect the yellow bird in two ways, which is the first yellow bird that really I feel is the seed, if you will, the bird seed, if you will, of me connecting with birds, was a little yellow duck. I had, as a young child, I got to pick out a little yellow duck. It was yellow at the time, a duckling that grew into being a white duck that started to live outside. But initially, when I was around 6, I was allowed to get a pet, and I picked out the little yellow duck named Fluffy Duck. I named her Fluffy Duck. And I had a lot of joy in that. There was a lot of chaos, unpredictableness about my life in some ways because of my mother's personality. I'm not blaming her. I'm just describing what that was for me, experiencing it as a child. And there was a lot of predictable aspects about going to school and visiting certain family members like my grandmother, things like that. And this little bird, the little duckling, really offered me solace and time. We had property. There's a lot of land, and I could just be on that land and roam around and sit and just play in the dirt and just connect. And I connected with the little bird. And then fast forward to decades forward, as a middle-aged adult, I became injured during a surgery, and I sustained a chronic, long-standing, permanent nerve damage, a rare neurological condition called chronic regional pain syndrome, CRPS, and it spread over my body. It started in my hand where the IV was set, and over time it spread. And at that time, they didn't know so much about it, and so some of the advice that was given to me in terms of how to control and treat it was what you would not do now. At any rate, it led to me becoming disabled, unable to really function, had to stop working, kept thinking I was going to return after a month, after a few months, and ultimately did not return. And at that time, I was an administrator for a mental health outpatient clinic in San Diego County within the child abuse prevention and family services realm. And so it was very shocking to me that I lost my capacity for physical activity, work that I'd been doing since I was in my early 20s. It was a huge loss. And so I developed severe depression, anxiety, stress, financial strain, some shame as well about not being able to function as I used to, isolation, like I mentioned, the grief and the loss at what I used to be able to do versus what I was able to do. Spent hours of time going in and out of doctor's appointments. And so I was at that point really couch bound, had tried different types of medications, none of them were effective. And so I really had lost hope. And this particular morning, I was trying to fill a pan of water and I looked out of the kitchen window. Like when you look out of the window, you can see a tree that grows over a fountain. And it has the yellow blossoms on this tree at certain times of the year in spring. And so when I saw this yellow flutter, I thought it was some of the blossoms, but something about it moved differently. And as I kept noticing it, it was this little yellow bird that you're referring to that is a yellow warbler. It was a male yellow warbler. And those are just that gorgeous buttery yellow, lemony, buttery yellow little birds. They're little birds with the little orange kind of rust streaking in their chest. And each time I would go to the kitchen, I would look for that bird. This was during the spring migration. So they were here. I'm in San Diego County. And it kept returning. And so I kept noticing it. And my curiosity was piqued. I noticed more and more what was outside, other birds that turned out to be resident birds versus the ones passing through. And so over time, I feel like that bird is what led me to start noticing my outside world was alive. There was opportunity for connection. And in that, I started experiencing less depression. All the symptoms that I said that are deemed potentially negative, which is not that I want to label them as negative, it's just what they were, right? I began to notice a reduction in those. I was less depressed. I was less feeling isolated. And my curiosity was piqued. So I was noticing the patterns more and more, and then started getting a guidebook to figure out what birds I was seeing. And then that led to me, after a few years, and I started improving physically. I'd spend a minute outside, 5 minutes outside, just sitting, walking, moving, and then in my neighborhood. So it just kind of rippled out, if you will, the rings of engagement, connection, curiosity. And the curiosity was fed, right? Because then I would see more birds. And so then ultimately I decided I would 1 year venture out. It was scary, to a bird outing, which was a Christmas bird count, and go birding them in that way. And that's what led me to then engage with Birding Club, Audubon, the local Audubon chapter, and get involved. And it just has multiplied and just compounded itself over time now. Like I couldn't even imagine my life without birds in this way. But I associate all of that with the two yellow birds, the two little birds that you mentioned.
I do like the way you've conceptualized this growth as the rings of engagement and connection and curiosity. For folks who are visual listeners and learners, you can just picture that window, you at the window viewing this yellow warbler, and how, you can just see the time and space expand from that center. It's a great image. So thank you for sharing that.
Now you're making me want to put it in a graphic.
Yeah, you should. So how many birds do you think you know now in San Diego County, from that yellow warbler to...
I don't even know the number. There's 583 species of birds that come through San Diego County. We're on the Pacific Flyway and actually get the majority of the birds that come into North America, quite honestly. So of that number, I don't even know, Georgia. I haven't even thought to count that. A lot of them?
A lot of them.
I think a good majority of them. I mean, there's going to be some that I have yet to see. And I miss ID birds all the time, like folks that go birding with me. I miss ID birds all the time, and I may know them in one concept way, but I'm terrible at IDing birds. I don't know if that's because I have poor vision. I want to try to attribute it to that. I don't know. So it's both.
I'm always amazed by people who can see a flash of something, a pattern, like just the edge of the pattern. And they'll ID the bird, and the bird will come out in full view, and it's the bird.
Yeah.
I have to see the bird like how you see birds in the field guide.
Yes. It's like, it's kind of high up there. Raptor. I can tell you it's a raptor.
Exactly. So, from looking out your window, seeing the yellow warbler, to walking through your neighborhood, becoming part of local bird clubs, did you think in that time that you would want to write about this transformation?
No, 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 no. See, this is where I talk about, sometimes I'll say that birds transcend space, time, and place. And I don't know how to explain it, but I really do believe and talk about the metaphysical aspects of birds. They defy reasoning at times, they defy what the norms. And so this is what I feel about how I came into writing the book in very similar ways. So I had gone to Cuba with my husband, and when I was there, there was this little dog, and I thought I would like to write a children's book about that. So when I came back, I was trying to figure out, okay, what would be a way to write this children's book? And I really was concerned. I didn't know anything about publishing, and so I wanted a source that I could rely upon to do so. And so I came across an email from Hay House that they were having a workshop, a writer's workshop in Houston over a weekend. And so fast forward to, I decided to go, even, justifying the cost expense. I have a long-term high school friend that lives in Houston, and I hadn't visited her yet. So I thought, well, that's a reason, and I get to see her, and we'll spend some time, because it had been a couple of years, I think, at least, since I'd seen her. And so that's what I did. And I really attribute the serenity of her space allowed me to also have time to reflect about this. So all that to say, I went to the workshop, and part of the first day, the CEO, Reed Tracy, was, giving people a motivational talk about writing. And one of the things he said was, write what you're passionate about. So then 2-3 hours go by, and it's time for lunch, and people by now are breaking off into groups, the classic conference. Do you want to go to lunch? Would you like to go? And I just did not want to go with anyone. Like, I just didn't want to go. And it was in a conference center, the Houston conference, but I just needed to get out for some reason. And I went by myself to lunch at a little Italian cafe down the road. And so I'm sitting there by myself, waiting for the food to come. And then it just hit me. What he said went back through my head, like, I'm passionate about birds. Because by then I was deep into birds. Like, there was no question about that. Like, that wasn't that long ago that this happened. This was in 2019. So it wasn't that long ago. And I just, like, that's what I should be writing about. I'm absolutely passionate about them. And so I sat with a yellow tablet and started writing out, just like it flooded me. It just flooded me with, bird watching at home, bird watching in the community, bird watching in the environment, like travel, bird watching in health, mental health, relationships. And that day, I wrote those down, and that's what became the chapters of the book. That's what guided me into creating the book proposal. It's worse than a thesis. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, is to write the book proposal. Yeah. It's very daunting, difficult. That took me months. But that's the framework of it, happened that day, sitting there at that lunch break. And so when I returned to the second portion of the conference and the next day, that's what I just focused on. Like, I knew, like, it just came. It's like, it was just like, that's why I'm here. This is what I'm supposed to do. And then when I was leaving, I took an Uber to the airport. And when I got into the Uber, this woman, she had a Cuban flag hanging from her radial knob.
Wow.
And she had Cuban music on. And I'm like, are you from Cuba? She goes, yes, there's a lot of Cubans that live here. And I was just like, okay. And then as she was getting on the freeway, like this half circle overpass to the next interchange, a huge bulletin board had a huge eagle on it. And for me, like, if you had any doubts, because then, there's always the little whispers of, well, what are you, birds? Who's going to care about birds? That, yes, you care, but come on, right? And the way I was thinking of writing the book would be different.
Yeah.
When I saw the eagle, I thought, and if you read my book, the eagle, like my dad, I feel like my dad was coming forward to say, yes, do it, do it, do it, write it, do it. Because he loved bald eagles. And this was a bald eagle.
That's powerful.
And then I have the tablet still. I mean, I've not even touched it. That's the book. That's how the book came to be.
There's so many things coming together. The universe was really shouting out to you that this is the path that you're on right now. And, maximize this time in your life. It's so incredible that you wrote your table of contents.
I mean, sometimes something like that either has to happen like that or it doesn't, right? Like, I mean, it just sounds like you could almost make it up. But it's like, I mean, I have it. That's why I have a knowing about the power that birds can have for folks. Because that's what I mean. I feel like this is beyond me. Like, I feel like this process of writing the book and things that have happened because of this, all of this, it feels beyond me. It feels, that's what I guess I'm trying to say. It feels beyond just me. And so I test that to the birds, because it's the birds and what they mean for so many people that propels engagement and conversations and community and all the things that, look, we're talking about it right now in your podcast, Bird Story.
Yeah, this coming together in 2019, which is before the global lockdown. And during that time period, lots of people became aware of the birds in their communities, right? And there are books that came out of the lockdown, but yours was bubbling up and coming together beforehand. Did the bird awareness that happened during those early years of the pandemic sort of validate your process, or how did you think about what people were experiencing in terms of birds during the lockdown and your experiences prior to it?
It did. It felt very affirming. It was interesting. I went to the conference in the fall of 2019. Oh, and so the other piece to this was, because I don't have an agent, although I need to probably get one, but I still don't. Okay, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, so at that time, I didn't have an agent, et cetera, just me. And part of what Hay House offered is to the cohorts folks that attended the workshop, and they had just started an online cohort, which I joined as well. It's like you could grandfather in for people that happened to be there in person at this particular one. From those cohorts, you could submit a proposal, and then they would select one grand prize winner who would then get signed without an agent for a publishing deal. And so I submitted, and mine was selected as the grand prize winning.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That just also affirmed that, because that happened in the summer of 2020. A lot of literature wasn't yet emerging out, like research. I guess you were starting to hear mention of people were noticing the birds a little bit because it was so quiet. And so I was aware of that as I started writing it, but I had already had the construct of it. So what it affirmed for me is to continue to listen to myself, write this the way that I had intended to write it, which I knew was going to be a different kind of bird book. And what was important for me was that the story be present in each chapter in the way that it was coming forward for me in my mind to share it. So that was something with the publisher that I really had to press forward and say, the story is going to be powerful and important as it relates to birds. And I know it's going to be different, but this is what I envision it to be. So more than anything was that piece to it. And then the other part was I worked a lot on the exercises, because I wanted it to offer resonance without giving answers for folks so that they could adapt it to their own experience. So I had to think very carefully of how to construct each question and help offer some guidance in the process. And I enjoyed doing that piece of it.
I was going to follow up and ask, I suppose, these guiding questions or how to move more deeply into the content questions. Those, I imagine, well, I shouldn't assume, but did you find that you relied on your training when you were developing those questions? Did they sort of come easy to you because of your experience in therapy and counseling?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So I definitely came with, the mental health background. I used that as my guidepost to make sure that they're sound clinically. But I also didn't want them to feel very clinical and therapy like either. And yet
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to be introspective and inviting and allow folks to have reflections and do some inner work as much as they feel able and capable and comfortable doing. So it's like a layered experience. So yes, definitely I'm bringing in what I know of in this, but then also my experience with birds. Some of it's experiential, like what did I go through in my healing? Because I did heal with the birds. I wouldn't describe myself as depressed now.
Mm.
I mean, I have the occasional normal anxiety, quote, normal process of anxiety and stress, as we all do. I'm not bedbound day in and day out. I do have times where I've over depleted myself, and we have to be mindful of rest. And that's applicable, I think, to all of us. I am a disabled birder in that I have this condition that, sometimes I walk with a little bit of slight limp, or I might take a rest a bit more than others as we're moving around, or the next day is when I'm not able to do as much because I overexerted while birding because I was so excited and happy to be out that I spent the whole day. And now it's like, well, now I can't do my laundry, you know,
Uh, oh, that laundry.
or the bills. And so I can go through all the other, now downtime, the body said, okay, you did it. So now we need the spoons, like I'm a spoonie in that way.
Yeah. Is there a chapter that you most enjoyed writing or just came the easiest of all the chapters?
Maybe the first chapter, actually, the first chapter about growing up
Mm,
with my mother Fran and the chickens and the duck. And then even though that was really a difficult chapter too, but difficult in a different way, making sure the
yeah.
story unfolded.
You dedicate the book to your mom, and in the dedication, you describe your mother as the rarest bird of them all. And if it's okay, would you mind sharing it with us what you mean by that, the rarest bird of them all?
I know this is going to touch my heart, Georgia. No one's asked me this. And my mom Fran is now entering, like she's going into transition phase
Mhm.
or pre-transition. It's that difficult period of end of life. And so she's 92. And it's almost like you would have to have known Fran
Mm.
to know. For those who maybe are hearing this and don't know about in the birding world, a rare bird is a bird, either it's in a space, a place that's observed, a species of bird that you would not normally see in that particular terrain or geographic area or region. Like it got blown off course from a storm and now it's showing up in another place. Like, wow, we never see these. That's rare. That's considered a rare bird. Or then there's also the occurrence of birds that you just hardly ever see. So they're so rare, even in where they are. Maybe they're endemic to the particular region or country or land. And those were considered rare birds too. So I'm just explaining the backdrop. And so with that, that is how I see my mother. She is always been rare in terms of her personality, her presence, and who she was, how she shows up, how she showed up when it wasn't popular, when she was considered crazy, zany. She had big thoughts and ideas that, like we talked about, in a world where you're not supposed to think like that. Who are you to think that grand or that big or that out there? Like, for example, I grew up with her talking about, and I'm talking when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, she would talk about there was going to come a time, she goes, Tammah, there's going to come a time where cars are going to drive themselves. You're going to just push in
Mm.
information about where you want to go, and then you're just going to get inside and it's just going to take you there. And then I used to think, like, she is so not well. She's really unstable, like these thoughts. And yet I admired her bravery in thinking like this. And she used to talk about like little capsules. Now, part of this, she saw Soylent Green and Clockwork Orange during that period. If you
Mm.
can, both may or may not be able to go back in time. But she talked about how we would get nourishment from little capsules that would make us feel full, and you could plug in what you wanted in these capsules, and then when you eat it, it's like the whole meal would map, almost like Willy Wonka. Remember Veruca Salt and Willy Wonka?
Yes.
but she hadn't seen that. I mean, but that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
She's one of those, and she, wanted us to have a farm. So she bought the land across, and she decided, this house, I need to find some way to pay for this. She did it when my dad went on a Westpac. He was in the Navy, very conservative, very predictable man, very, organized and regimented. And then here is a Fran who left home when she was 9, 10 years old, went back periodically, but because of life with her family, who was very religious, her father was a minister, he understood she was considered very brilliant. So here's this very bright Black girl growing up in a world that's really not for her. And she found different ways. She wanted to go to the United Nations in San Francisco at the time, and she hitched rides to get there. She dyed her hair. I mean, when I was a teenager, she was dyeing her hair pink and purple using Kool-Aid and spiking it. She's like, I'm going to spike it. Now it wouldn't even seem like it would raise an eyebrow, right? But imagine then you're going to the AME church and she's like, I don't care. I am going to wear my hair like this. The family, meanwhile, was very conservative, and Fran, and maybe she's like the bird lady in that way. You see what I mean? Like she went to school, she didn't go to high school, and she ultimately ended up in a PhD program in psychology, wanted to go into parapsychology, did all kinds of amazing things, traveled different parts of the world, and raised me and my brother and other children. I mean, I could go on and on. She had one of the first halfway houses for women coming out of prison beyond this land that she bought for us to have a farm. So she converted the front house into a halfway house for women, because she could understand that they needed a way to go. I mean, and I can just go on and on. Like I could just go on and on. And so that essence of her, as you get older, I had a deeper appreciation. I did then too, but I also that's what I meant by chaotic, because her mind was always going. And she loved to read voraciously, and that was her escape, was to read and read and read. But it allowed her to live and experience and be like that too. No limits. I am in part because of this rare bird, no limits, try and do things that you can think of. And she always says, if you can think it, you can do it. That sits with me. So that's Fran.
Fran. She sounds, so prescient, like a prophet, like a futurist, an Afrofuturist. She's of and ahead of her time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Non-conforming. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What a gift to have that as part of who you are.
It is. Yes. Thank you for asking about her. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I like to read, all the parts of our book. I really like to look at the dedication and the acknowledgments before I even get into the meat of the book. And I saw that and I thought, oh, I know, all dedications have a story, but there's just something, and I suppose this was like resonant. It felt like there was some charge behind that dedication that would be fruitful to explore. So I'm also really grateful that you felt comfortable sharing the story behind that dedication with us. So one of the ways I follow your work, and many other people do, is through Instagram. Your posts are, how would I describe them? They're sort of part bird, 101, part soul 101, part like landscape, because people can see where you are. It feels like a dose of goodness, each of your posts. And so I want to know what inspires you. Are they spontaneous? Do you plan them in advance? What goes into your Instagram feed, this way of communicating with folks?
I've never talked about this either. Thank you for what you shared about that. I can't do Instagram unless I'm really called to post something. That's how I post. Like sometimes I know that I'm going to post something because I want to make sure it's shared out. But that might be like an offering that I know, like a pop-up birding. Like right now in my head, I know there's a pop-up birding that's about to come up for the weekend as we go into Black Birders Week. So that's just something like behind the scenes that we're trying to coordinate. I'm part of the SoCal Bird Nerds. which is a group of us, BIPOC, majority African American Black, but we're BIPOC of all identities here in San Diego County, Southern California. That's the kind of thing, like I know it, but I still can't post it. And that's what it feels like. I can't until, like, I just have to have the words come out, how they're going to come out. And that's what you see when I post. So it's not how you're quote unquote supposed to do Instagram and all the algorithms and, have a look that's uniformal and pulls people and, hundreds of thousands of followers. That's not how I'm oriented to do it. And the Instagram, it was important for me, though, to be authentic about how I am in life, because I feel like birds show up in all the things we do. So that's why I do share all the different ways that birds are interconnected and show up for me. And I'm hoping that that allows that to be the case for others too. So that's kind of how the Instagram is. We don't know sometimes where we're going to go.
It's like OG Instagram, right? Instagram, like you got inspired and you post. You weren't sort of thinking about a calendar and a schedule. You just posted when it, when it hit you. And because of the way you speak to the audience through the camera, it feels like, oh, this is something that I can do. It doesn't seem like, you're not trying to climb the highest mountain in the world. You're just where you are doing what you're doing. I mean, you could end up being at, the tallest mountain in the world viewing some raptor. And I think it would also feel accessible because of your presentation. I really enjoy that feed. It's nice to have positive media in the world, and your Instagram feels very much like that. It really feeds the soul. So,
oh, thank you. There's times where, life has pain and sorrow and grief and loss and the joys and celebrations and honorings too. I mean, I can't not share that part too. It is how it evolves out of me, and then through the experience. What is a calendar in that way? Like, I know there's a whole way you could like lay it out and do all those things, but I'm really technologically challenged. I have someone that helps me do like the website and the link tree because I don't know how to do that. So it's like,
I want to close by focusing in on where you are in San Diego County. And do you have a patch, so a favorite place to go birding? And is there a particular bird, not a spark bird, but just a bird that when you see it, you're going to smile, like you have a special smile for a particular species?
So in terms of a particular spot, I have to say, like, I bird every day because I start at home. Like, if I never leave home for whatever reason, because I work 1 day a week from home, but I'm still birding because I'm going to bird through my window. Like, I'm in my office right now and I have a couple of hummingbird feeders outside. And I almost feel like, depending on where you are in your home, like I have a chair that I can sit in at a certain angle and look out into the backyard. And then I have a bench by the front door that I sit out. Like this morning, I got up at 5:30 this morning before the cars start driving by, because I live in a classical suburban neighborhood with cars and traffic and, noises. So I get up early just to enjoy that stillness with the birds, and now we're in the dawn chorus. So they're very much alive and awake and moving. So I go out with coffee and I sit there. So that's another spot. And then in the backyard, I have two spots. One, a picnic table kind of setup. And then there's the side patio that I talked about, because I've lived here for over 20 years. So that tree that was little grew, and that's where the yellow warbler was. The tree's much taller now, but it's still there. The fountain's still there. So there's a side patio that at the time we moved in, it was all dirt. We had it put in. I thought about the fountain because I like the tranquility of the sound of the water. I wasn't even thinking about birds. Like, oh, birds will use it as a bird feeder. That didn't even dawn on me. Like, now I don't even know what a yard would have looked like. So fortunately, the water features there because the birds, of course, come to bathe there. So I sit on that side too and enjoy that quiet space too. All that to say, I have several perch spots.
I like that. Perch spots. Yeah. And the bird that makes you smile.
Oh yeah, it's the black phoebe.
Hmm.
They're so sweet, and they just like they'll land on like a little light post or the back of a chair, or I hardly ever see them in a tree, quite honestly. They're usually on some man-made object like a line, and they seem not so fearful,
Mm-hmm.
and with their tail bobbing since they're the flycatcher, and they just, to me, they're sweet, they're sound. And I always feel like they come by and say, hello, hello. Like sometimes I see their little droppings on the ledge on the front porch.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's one that hangs out there. I don't always see it, but I see like the droppings sometimes. So it touches my heart like, oh, good. Okay. So they're still coming. Even when I don't see them, there's evidence of them being there. So and it makes me smile every time.
Hmm.
And I saw one this morning. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think that's a good place to end with the Black Phoebe who visits regularly. Thank you so much for spending this time talking with me about the book, your childhood, how you came into birding, what it's like for you now. Thanks so much, Tammah.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you so much for your beautiful questions. It has warmed my heart. Things happen for reasons, and I'm just grateful and I'm honored to be on the show. Bird stories is is the essence in my heart too. That the honoring of that, and I was so happy when you chose to connect to be on. So thank you. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Your Bird Story. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you back here next month.